Welcome to the new Transatlantic Cable, a tripartite civil engineering history webinar series. The webinars are coordinated by the History and Heritage Committee of the American Society of Civil Engineers, the National History Committee of the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering, and the Panel for Historical Engineering Works of the Institution of Civil Engineering. Today's installment, recorded on May 22nd, 2024, features Richard Groome on the bridge that crossed the Atlantic. Hello, and welcome. I'm Mike Bartlett, Chair of the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering's National History Committee, and I'll be your host on today's tripartite New Transatlantic Cable Civil Engineering History webinar. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Richard Groome. Son of the city engineer Leonard Groome, who ran the new London Bridge project, Richard is also a liveryman in the City of London and an engineer himself. He's constructed, inter alia, hospitals, schools, food factories, and defense facilities, and currently specializes in energy from waste. Richard, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mike. A warm welcome to you all, and thank you for listening. This is going to be the story of 4 bridges. One of them is in the United States, and it's a fascinating history. The 4 bridges that we're going to talk about this evening are the Old London Bridge, built by Peter de Colchurch and lasting between 1209 and 1831, an amazing 600 years or so of one bridge into London. The second bridge is the John Rennie Bridge, 1831 to 1973, and that is the bridge that went to America across the Atlantic. So the third bridge will be the construction of that in the United States in 1968 and how that was achieved. And then I'm going to look at the new London Bridge, built in 1973, and still the current London Bridge. And there are 3 misapprehensions that I'm going to correct in this talk, so look out for these later. The first one is, no, the Americans knew they were buying London Bridge, not Tower Bridge, as was rumoured at the time. Secondly, the new London Bridge cost the taxpayer absolutely nothing. I'll explain how that was done. And thirdly, the bridge in the United States is actually only an outer shell. It's not a full bridge that we sold the Americans. We just sold them the outer shell of London Bridge. But that'll be explained later. So firstly, a few words about bridges before 1209, so before Peter de Colchurch's bridge. There is a general agreement that the first bridge was Roman, probably built something like this, and probably in AD 50, just east of the existing bridge. Now, Julius Caesar told us in written submissions how they built bridges about 100 years before that. And here's one of his descriptions. 2 pointed piles, 18 inches thick, were formed into a truss and driven into the riverbed with pile drivers inclined towards the current. Opposite and 40 feet downstream, a similar arrangement leaning into the stream. Then these were joined by a transom 2 foot wide, secured to the piles by iron dogs, and diagonal braces were fitted between the piles. Additional piles and horizontal timbers were fitted to prevent damage by floating tree trunks, etc. That Roman bridge was almost certainly timber because remains have been found on the north bank of the River Thames. And the port of London, or Londinium as it was known then, developed on the north bank. And the tide of the Thames enabled seagoing vessels to visit. Also, because this was the lowest bridge on the Thames, it helped the Romans control southern England up to about 410 AD. And after that, things are uncertain. Does anyone here read Bernard Cornwell, or in particular, have you seen The Last Kingdom on Netflix with Uhtred, son of Uhtred? Well, these novels were set in 871 to 899, that's King Alfred the Great's time, and he referred to a breached London Bridge with a great river flow through his middle. At vast expense, I have contacted Bernard Cornwell, and he believes that this was still the Roman bridge. But it was not to last much longer, because in 993, King Olaf of Norway was able to plunder Staines, which is about 30 miles inland, without encountering a bridge anywhere on this route. The next reference to the bridge that's thought to be reliable is in the time of Ethelred the Unready. Unready actually means ill-counselled in Anglo-Saxon, so he wasn't very well advised. But London was held by the Danes at that point, with a large fortress at Southwark on the southern side of the bridge, and a fairly stout timber London bridge, heavily fortified. Ethelred, supported by Olaf the Norseman, attacked the bridge in 1014 and were initially beaten off, but they then tied their ships to the bridge and rowed downstream, taking the bridge with them. Hence the expression and the song, London Bridge is falling down. It is mentioned again as a whole bridge in William the Conqueror's charters of 1067. It was swept away again in 1091, destroyed by a great fire in 1135, far more damaging to London, by the way, than the famous Great Fire of 1666. And small wonder then that the city, the church, and the king together decided to invest in a completely new bridge, and they appointed Peter de Colchurch to be responsible. Was he an engineer? Well, no, he wasn't. He was a chaplain of St Mary's Church, where Thomas Becket, then the Archbishop of Canterbury, had been baptised. So the new chapel on London Bridge would be called St Thomas's, the starting point for pilgrims going to Canterbury. And it would stand on the great pier in the middle, taking the full force of wind, weather, and the river. Peter de Colchurch's bridge would stand for over 600 years and was the only bridge in central London for 540 of those. It took 33 years to build. 10 of those were sort of wasted using a wooden construction, and they then switched to stone, which was interesting because there wasn't any stone for miles and it had to be shipped from places like the West Country of UK. Remarkably, it was a wonder the bridge got built at all, because England was strapped for cash at the time. Richard I was away fighting the Crusades. That's Richard the Lionheart. So his brother, King John, financed the bridge by a special tax on wool. The construction was inspired, with the 19 arches resting on round stones, secured in oak and elm palisades, and surrounded by boat-shaped starlings, and not, as rumour had it at the time, sitting on wool packs. It is not known why he chose pointed arches, perhaps his church connections. He may have known the French Pontist religious order, who were almost simultaneously building the famous Pont d'Avignon. However, his bridge created such a barrier to the Thames that there was often a 5-foot level difference, a mini Niagara through every arch, making travel under the bridge an interesting ride to rival today's theme parks. Peter died before the bridge was finished in 1205, and he was interred under the chapel. We will hear more about him in 1830. There's the picture of Thomas's chapel in the middle pier of London Bridge. There was nothing like this bridge in the rest of Europe, with the houses and shops ordered by King John to help pay for the upkeep. And such was the greed of the developers that many of the houses were there before the bridge even opened. Their upper stories projected across the street and out across the river, often propped up precariously, as you can see in this picture. This was to get maximum income with very little space available. They were all built of wood. This picture in the London Museum is actually 400 years later, but it shows the idea quite well. So underneath, the only road into London, barely 12 foot wide, swarming with people and animals and wagons, and underneath the perpetual noise of the water. Imagine the noise, smells, and congestion. Crossing the bridge could take an hour. All the new houses were destroyed by fire within 3 years of their construction, with hundreds of people killed. There were frequent fires and quick housing replacements for many years to come, until the houses were removed by Act of Parliament in 1758. Now, just a word about the tolls on the bridge. Interestingly, you could take 100 rabbits across the bridge for half an old British penny. Now, that's about $2 American in today's money. So that sounds like a reasonable bridge toll. But you try taking £1 of woven cloth from overseas across the bridge, and you were charged sixpence, or about $24 in today's money. This was obviously a punitive tax to protect the English wool trade. These tolls were collected at the Bridge House near the chapel, and the fund that resulted from that was called the Bridge House Estates Fund. That fund, started in 1209, would later partly finance the current London Bridge. And you'll see all that later. A couple of pictures of Old London Bridge, 1500s and slightly after that. You can see the 19 channels charging under the bridge in a very dangerous, huge currents. And you can also see below how busy and developed the northern side of the bridge was compared with the southern side. The southern side was undeveloped and was more for leisure. And that has remained the same to some extent. The north side of London is much more busy and populated than the south, even now, although that's changing. There's something missing from this picture on the southern side of the bridge, which are the heads of people who had defended against the state. So they started sticking heads on the bridge in about 1580. And you can see them down the bottom there, the bottom right of this slide. And you can see how absolutely ridiculously overcrowded London Bridge was. How there was possibly a road through that lot, you can't really conceive. The first person to go onto the bridge in terms of his head was William Wallace, or Braveheart. He was followed by Thomas More in 1535 and Oliver Cromwell in 1540. You might be interested in the demise of Oliver Cromwell, by the way. He was the guy who ordered Charles I be executed, and he reigned as Lord Protector for many years. died and was buried normally. But when Charles II came to the throne, this was the guy that had murdered his father. So he ordered the corpse to be dug up. The corpse was taken to court and tried for treason. He was then decapitated and cut up into 4 pieces, and his head was put on London Bridge. They were pretty brutal people in those days. A visiting German diplomat in 1538 would report seeing 34 heads on the bridge, all at the southern end. You'll hear shortly about adding corn mills to the bridge in the 1600s and water wheels just before that to pipe water off the Thames. But I next want to show you Nonsuch House, 1579. The northern gate of the bridge was replaced with this beautiful house, and it's amazing that they had such advanced photography in those days to be able to take this picture. This building was built off-site in Flanders. It was reassembled on the bridge without any nails being used. One of the very first prefabricated houses. But despite being picturesque and famous, London Bridge was very dangerous and very expensive. A whole house, complete with occupants, fell off the bridge in 1438. You can see there the water wheels on the northern side of the bridge, and the corn mills, I believe, are on the other side. That's a model in the London Museum. So the bridge sank as it got older and heavier, losing its gentle slope up to the middle and ending up flat. Even then, they added those corn mills in the 16th century and the water wheels on the other side. They all went up in flames in 1633, were rebuilt, lost again in 1666. And by this time, the bridge was so weak that £1,500, a fortune actually, worth about $1.5 million at today's prices, was spent shoring it up again. In 1722, to reduce congestion, traffic was ordered to keep left. This good idea was soon to spread to other parts of the UK and is the origin of us driving on the left. Another fire in 1725 caused a rebuild from the foundations at the Southwark end, where there was also a wooden drawbridge. And it's all downhill from then for London Bridge. Nonsuch House had become a shop and the chapel a paper warehouse. The opening of Westminster Bridge in 1749 was the death knell of old London Bridge. It was wide and spacious with no houses, and so they took the houses off London Bridge and widened the centre arch, which the river tore through and ate away. They even then put another water wheel in 1767, restricting the side flow even further. And then there were a series of vicious frosts in 1768, 1785, and 1789. By the start of the 1800s, the bridge was in total disrepair. Here's a cartoon top left here called the Melancholy Bridge from 1758. One of the fires in the late 1700s, that's the waterworks going up in smoke. And this picture by Daniel Turner shows the sort of ice build-up, partly caused by the very low temperatures, obviously, but mainly caused by the restriction of flow for London Bridge. That ice was battering the bridge every year and causing lots of damage. A guy called William Gifford, in the Quarterly Review during 1814, said, "This pernicious structure has wasted more money on perpetual repairs than would have been sufficient to build a dozen safe and commodious bridges, and has cost the lives perhaps of as many as 1,000 people." So, a select committee was formed to improve the Port of London, and as part of that work, build a new London Bridge. And a variety of plans were put forward. The Rennie Bridge is bottom left, not very clear in that picture. An alternative bottom right involved two bridges, obviously quite an expensive option. My favourite was Thomas Telford's Iron Bridge, shown up top. And you've got to remember that Thomas Telford had built the first cast iron bridge in the world in 1779 at Coalbrookdale in Shropshire. This bridge is still there today and survived all the floods and so on that the River Severn could throw at it. But in 1779, it was a bit unproven for the burghers of London, so they didn't go for it. Bit of a shame, really. I think it's a very attractive, single-span, lovely bridge, and it probably would still have been there had it been built. We'll just talk about finance briefly. In 1821, Old London Bridge had an annual income from tolls of £30,000. Now, there were $5 to the pound in those days, so that was $150,000. And John Rennie's estimate for the new bridge was £450,000, so it would pay back in 15 years. In the event, a special toll on coal was introduced to pay for it more quickly. John Rennie Sr. died almost before the work was started. So it was his son, also called John Rennie, who actually built the new bridge. It was built 180 feet west of the old bridge, which remained open until the new bridge was completed. It was thought that once the bridge was demolished, the increased river flow might sweep away Westminster and other bridges now upstream, and they did actually require rebuilding or strengthening in some cases. But the worst did not happen. You'll also remember I said that we would meet Peter Colechurch again in 1830. Well, it's during the demolition of the old London Bridge that his bones were found under the old chapel, but they were carelessly thrown into the river by a workman. What a shame. Here's some construction pictures done by a young guy called E.W. Cook. They are engravings, but you can see very clearly on the bottom picture the old London Bridge on the left and the new Rennie Bridge on the right. You can also see the cranes they had for construction use, but that's about all they had in terms of moving equipment. The rest of it was all done by block and tackle or hands. And you can see that they formed the new Rennie Bridge with bridge formers there on the left. And remember that picture again when we come to Lake Havasu City in Arizona in a little while. The finished Rennie Bridge in 1832 is shown at the bottom. And again, later on, you will see that pretty much identical picture in Lake Havasu City. The Rennie Bridge was pretty much solid granite and weighed 130,000 tons. It took 6 years to build and ran 18 months late. A typical civil engineering project in the UK, I might say. It had a magnificent 53-foot wide roadway, but was so crowded with horse-drawn vehicles that it was said you couldn't cross London Bridge without seeing a white horse. It was now that the new railways were bringing in large numbers of commuters, so further weight was added to the bridge, with the addition of outer footpaths. Now that picture is taken in the early 1900s. And you can see that most of the traffic is horse-drawn. By the time we get to the next picture, taken in the 1960s, probably when my father was going to work in the city, over 1 million people a day would cross London Bridge during the commuter rush hour. And that's what it looked like, along with all the traffic. I also want to mention Nancy Steps briefly. That's the northern end of the bridge, the old Rennie Bridge. And down to the left there was a set of steps where you could go down and get a steamer boat to take you out to Dover and other places. But they're called Nancy Steps because of the novel by Dickens, Oliver Twist. And those of you that have read Oliver Twist know that Nancy was murdered on a set of steps by Bill Sikes in the book, and those were the steps where that happened. Dickens was writing this in 1838 when the bridge was still fairly new, and it was a very topical story. The steps are actually still there, but they're buried in the abutments of the new London Bridge, so you can't see them anymore. So although the weight of the bridge would eventually be its downfall, it was a very strong bridge, and it never failed in terms of its structure. It even survived an anarchist's dynamite explosion in 1884. Rennie's Bridge actually lasted for 142 years. I can remember passing under the bridge on a boat as a child and seeing the tilt that had developed, because you could see the water level across the bridge was on different bricks. But the city corporation decided that stabilising and widening the bridge was not an economic option. So it was decided to build a new bridge at a cost of £4 million. Although my father's notes say that it ended up at £5.5 million, we'll gloss over that quickly. The key players would be Mott, Hay and Anderson as consulting engineers for the design and site supervision, William Holford and Partners as architects, and John Molam and Company as the civil engineering contractors. John Molam, a lovely company, but would eventually become part of Carillion and go into insolvency in 2018. Such a shame. So my father, Leonard Groome, was the City of London's liaison officer, in other words, the client, in charge of the whole project. And the work started in 1967. Meanwhile, a unique process was also underway to offer the old bridge, or actually 10,000 tons of it. Remember, the whole bridge weighed 130,000 tons. So this is the elevational stonework only, the outer skin of the bridge. This was offered on a worldwide basis. And the winning tender was £1 million. Or in those days, $2.4 million. All the rest of the money for the bridge would come from the Bridge House Estates Fund. That fund that was collecting tolls in 1209 would now pay for the new bridge entirely, apart from the £1 million from the Americans. By the way, the Americans had to pick the bridge up and transport it at their cost. So it was pick up only for $2.4 million. There's the original form of tender signed by the McCullough Oil Corporation for $2.460 million. So now let's follow those stones to America. The McCullough Oil Corporation of Los Angeles were the successful bidders. famous as being inventors of the chainsaw, their plan was to develop a new resort at Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and surround it with new factories making chainsaws and other products. I remember seeing correspondence from them with a picture of London Bridge on the top. So they knew jolly well which bridge they were buying. It's possible, though, that the American public did not, hence the rumour that it was Tower Bridge. The bridge in Lake Havasu City would be a new 5-arch bridge, same number of arches, obviously, as the old London Bridge, constructed exactly to the profile of the old bridge, but built in double cantilevers in an earthquake zone. Designed actually by the same team that will be designing the new London Bridge in London. 12,000 pieces of the Rennie Bridge were numbered and then shipped 7,000 miles in a 3-year operation. So here's some pictures of the assembly of the stones in the various compounds. And you might just be able to see here what looks like a stick, a little black stick sticking up. That's actually me, and I'm in the yard at Tilbury Docks helping put stones in the crates. I was only 17 about then, and I was only helping out at weekends. It was discovered that the stones had been numbered once before, by Rennie no less, when the original bridge had been built. So here we are in Lake Havasu City, where instead of using formers to build the arches, they used the sand, because this was a desert. There wasn't any water there, so they could just make an arch out of the sand, construct the new bridge underneath the shell of the old London Bridge, take out the sand afterwards, and then eventually put the lake under it. Which those pictures show the result of that. And that top right picture I promised you earlier is pretty much the same view as they took in 1832 when it was in London. Now we go back to the current London Bridge, called the New London Bridge. This was designed on the same centre line as the Rennie Bridge. So not built to one side like the old bridge had been, but exactly on the same centre line. This time it would only weigh 55,000 tonnes. Work started in November 1967 and continued until 1972, but at no time was the main traffic or the pedestrian flow stopped. You will see how it was done in a moment. It is a 3-span, pre-stressed, post-tensioned concrete bridge designed as 4 parallel box beams. So it's hollow, and I have walked through it. It was built as 4 bridges joined together and was until recently the only hollow bridge over the Thames. The new foundations are 100 feet below high water and were evacuated by hand. They are 26-foot diameter at the base and 12-foot at the top. And of course, while they were digging this out, just alongside was highly stressed clay supporting the existing bridge. It must have been a tricky job. There are 250 miles of wire strands in the bridge. And once again, granite has been used on the facings. The overall width of the bridge, 107 feet, including 2 30-foot wide carriageways, a bit different to the single 12-foot wide old London Bridge. So how was it built without stopping the traffic? So these sketches show you part of the story, and I'll then show you another slide. But at the top there, you can see the Rennie Bridge behind, and the construction of the first quarter of the new London Bridge starts to its right-hand side. A gantry was built over the top, show you a picture in a moment, to take all the construction loads. Londoners speculated they would have to cross this gantry to get across the river in whatever weather. That wasn't the case, of course. First, the upstream footway was taken off the old bridge and the first quarter of the new bridge constructed. Pedestrians went onto the one remaining downstream footway, which was widened at the expense of carriageway width. Then traffic went onto the new quarter bridge, pedestrians onto the carriageway of the old bridge. Next, the same process on the downstream side of the old bridge by moving the gantry and constructing the second quarter on the other side. That's showing at the top left there. Then we have pedestrians on this section and traffic on the other section, leaving the old Rennie Bridge in the middle, free of all traffic. Rennie's Bridge was then demolished half at a time, using the steel gantry overhead for each operation. As soon as quarter 3 was finished, southbound traffic went on to that. Finally, they built the fourth quarter and joined all 4 quarters together by the construction of diaphragms to complete the bridge. So you can see the gantry quite clearly there, which was moved about to take the construction loads. The bottom picture shows the 2 parts of the new bridge on the left and the right, and the Rennie Bridge in the middle. There's a better picture at the bottom there, showing new bridge on the left, old bridge on the right, and more pictures of the gantry above. There's some pictures inside the bridge of the hollow section and the reinforcing rods. And eventually it was opened on the 16th of March 1973 by the Queen. A most amazing project. So I'm coming to an end very soon now, but just a few closing remarks. There's the beautiful bridge, 3 spans, as it was finished in 1973, and largely built due to the Bridge House Estates Fund. So let's tell you a bit more about this. It looks after all the city bridges. That's City of London bridges, so things like Dartford and so on aren't included. And it was a significant contributor to the new Millennium Bridge built in 2000. It gives notable amounts to charity and has about £500 million worth of commercial property. Not bad for a toll collecting fund that these days gets nothing from the users of the bridge. In the next picture, I was one of the liverymen who drove sheep over London Bridge in 2009. And as a freeman of the City of London, as my wife is also, you can see her on the right there, she's the one in the blouse. As a freeman of the City of London, you have an ancient right to drive sheep over London Bridge, which we did. And we celebrated the 800th anniversary of Peter de Colchurch's bridge. A design competition then proposed this solution for developing the bridge in the future. I will leave you to decide what you think of that. So now we've covered 815 years of history and 4 bridges. So I will stop sharing now and invite any questions. Thank you for listening.
Richard, that was marvelous. Thank you. That was just complete story with all kinds of delightful chapters, and I really enjoyed it very much. To our webinar audience, please use the Q&A feature, which you find on your toolpad, to send us some questions. I'm sure Richard will be happy to try to answer as many as he can. Maybe to kick things off, how would the new London Bridge fare if it was struck by an ocean-going vessel, Richard?
Yeah, good question, Mike. It's a pretty solid granite and concrete bridge, obviously, and it seems to be pretty strong. It was struck in 1984 by HMS Jupiter, and HMS Jupiter was pretty wrecked by this collision, far more damage than the bridge. The Bridge House Estates Fund, of course, repaired the bridge. That's what they always do. But the river is very busy. Boat speeds are low, and certainly you wouldn't see an ocean-going large vessel in that vicinity anymore. And also the docks have closed. So it's not got the high risk of some other bridges, but it's a pretty strong bridge.
Thanks. I was curious, you said that the piers for the new London Bridge, the current London Bridge, I think you said had been excavated manually. Was there a particular reason why they chose to do that?
It was just too risky to use machinery because the old bridge was still there, and it's all built in clay, which is very unstable. So they had to do it by hand. Ridiculous, really, looking back, but that was what they decided to do.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's quite something. Why is Hammersmith Bridge not included in the group of 4 that you mentioned that are looked after by the management group?
Because Hammersmith Bridge is not in the City of London. This is very complicated. There's Greater London and the authority looking after that, but the City of London is only 1 mile square, and it's just got those 4 bridges. It's unfortunate because Hammersmith Bridge is still not fully repaired and properly opened again after many years of having troubles. Pretty sure if the Bridge House Estates Fund was looking after it, they'd have sorted it out a long time ago.
Thanks. Another question. What grade of concrete is used in the new bridge, and what's its expected service life, please?
I don't know, I'm afraid. I've not got that. I can find out, but I don't know the answer to that. Sorry.
No, that's fair.
I do have a side story, which is my father, obviously they were using test cubes every day at the site, and a lot of these found their way home, and he built all the terraces around our house and were built with concrete cubes from London Bridge. So that's where the concrete strength was measured, but I don't know what it was.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And I'm smiling because in Canada and the United States, we use cylinders, not cubes, and finding a useful use for tested cylinders is much more difficult. People try to put them as little fences around their gardens and things, but not nearly as useful as a terrace. We've got another question. Was London Bridge bombed during the Blitz in the Second World War?
It was not struck by a bomb, as far as I know. You'd have thought that it would have been targeted. But if they did target it, they didn't succeed. There is a website, actually, bombsite.org.uk or something like that, which shows the location of every single bomb dropped on London in the Blitz. Now, how they did that, I don't know.
Wow.
But if you want to check it out, that's where it is.
Super, thank you. This is a lovely question. How were the 1772 rules of the road to keep left enforced on the old London Bridge?
By the very early policemen in those days, the police force starts to get going under Robert Peel, which is a little bit after that. So that's like early 1800s. But before that, they had sort of local bailiff type police officers who would enforce it. But it was also, when you went through the toll booths, you were forced to go to the left. So that was how it was done.
Nice. Yep. We've got a question. Did I hear you say that that at Coalbrookdale, the cast iron bridge was designed and built by Thomas Telford? Was
Yeah.
it not designed by John Wilkinson? I'm going to have to Google that one.
I'll have to Google that. It's always known as Telford's Iron Bridge. An interesting fact about that bridge, the fact that it's still there and it was built of cast iron, which is very brittle, is because it was designed by carpenters. So maybe John Wilkinson was the carpenter, and it includes a lot of pin joints and holes, and actually flexes all the time and has stayed in one piece over the years. So maybe Wilkinson was the carpenter who designed it on Telford's team. I don't know.
Thanks. No, that's a good suggestion. One thing I know about the Coalbrookdale Bridge is that they really overestimated the thrusts that the iron arch would apply to the embankments at each end. And one of the reasons why the bridge is increasingly peaky is that the horizontal pressure of the soil is actually reducing the span slightly and causing it to
Yeah.
deform.
What they did, Mike, it's about 15 years ago, they built a reverse bridge in the river in concrete. And that's stopping this happening. So it shouldn't get any worse. But you're absolutely right. That was the case.
Yeah. No, I guess if you're used to thrusts associated with 130,000 tons of masonry arches, you might get that one wrong. This is a simple question. Will the recording be generally available perhaps on YouTube or Vimeo? The answer to that one is yes. Actually, recordings of virtually all of the presentations that have been presented in this webinar series are available online. And if you're having trouble finding them, you could send me an email, f.m.bartlett@uwo.ca. I might even type that so people can see it. Have you been to Lake Havasu City to see the bridge there?
I wish I had, but I haven't. My father went, I think, twice, and I believe he was given the freedom of the city. But I had a vague opportunity. One of the Lord Mayors of London was going out there, and I said, "Can I carry your bag?" But he didn't take me up on it, which was a shame, because I would have been able to help him with a lot of information. But the answer is no, I haven't been. Would like to go, and it's on the bucket list still. So hopefully we'll go one day.
I hope so too. One's from Gordon Masterton. Well done, Richard. An excellent talk on a very unusual US-UK civil engineering connection. As far as I'm aware, it remains unique. Do you think we'll ever see another bridge be dismantled and cross international borders? Would the carbon footprint rule it out?
Yeah, I think it probably would rule it out, actually, because it was a very expensive operation, and without being rude, it was a bit of a vanity trip for the McCullers. But why not? I mean, they wanted to do something special and make a gesture, and that's what they did. And Lake Havasu City is enriched because of it. But I don't think it'll ever happen again, no. Thank you to Gordon for his kind comments.
Oh, of course. Richard, again, thank you. This has been a lovely presentation and great answers to questions. And we've got 70 people watching this who I'm sure are eager to see the video. So thank you very much for a job well done. And thank you very much for attending this afternoon's webinar, this evening's webinar in the UK. And we'll see you on September 25th. Have a great summer in the meantime. Bye for now. The new transatlantic cable webinars are coordinated by a tripartite ad hoc committee that includes the individuals listed here.